Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 2 months.
Who took an 84-year-old woman in the dead of night in her pajamas with no shoes, without her medicine. This little person.
It's been reported that more than one back door was propped open. But what about the motive? What could the motive be?
The 2 notes that we received, that we responded to, I tend to believe those are real.
This is one of the responses that she's referring to.
She is our beacon. She holds fast to joy in all of life's circumstances. She chooses joy day after day. We are always going to be merely human, just normal human people.
Each one of their videos used a very specific set of words. It's reported that the FBI did assist in crafting these earlier responses.
The FBI released this footage to the entire world. Every major news network played it on a loop. Millions of people watched it. Experts analyzed it frame by frame on live television. And in all of that collective scrutiny, not one outlet, not one analyst, not one reporter stopped to look at the jacket. Not closely enough. Because if they had, this case would look very different right now. What nobody saw is what we are about to show you. On the morning of February 10th, 2026, the Federal Bureau of Investigation did something that it rarely does this early in a kidnapping investigation. It went public. After 10 days of near-total silence, 10 days of search teams combing the desert, helicopters cutting grids above the Catalina foothills, a family releasing increasingly desperate video appeals on social media, and a nation holding its breath through every press briefing that produced more questions than answers, the FBI released surveillance footage recovered from the front door of a home north of Tucson. The home belonged to Nancy Guthrie. When Nancy Guthrie disappeared, it was not just a family's private nightmare. It was a national story within hours. And when the FBI released footage of a masked, armed individual approaching Nancy's front door in the early hours of February 1st, footage recovered by Google engineers from residual data left behind in back-end servers after the camera itself had been deliberately disconnected. The entire country stopped and looked. The reaction was immediate and total. The White House was briefed on the footage before it was released to the public. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stood before reporters and confirmed that President Trump himself had reviewed the imagery. She said the president was urging every American with any knowledge of the suspect to contact the FBI. FBI Director Kash Patel posted the footage to his own account on X, describing the individual as armed and stating that the images showed the suspect appearing to tamper with the camera at Nancy Guthrie's front door. Savannah Guthrie posted the footage to her Instagram account alongside a message that compressed an entire family's agony into a single sentence. "We believe she is still alive. Bring her home." Within hours, the video had been viewed tens of millions of times. It became, almost instantly, one of the most watched pieces of surveillance footage in recent American history. And the world looked. They looked with the full force of a global audience that had been following this case for 10 days and was desperate for something concrete to hold on to. They looked at the ski mask pulled tight across the face, covering everything except a narrow strip around the eyes and a faint shadow beneath the fabric that experts identified as the trace of a mustache. They looked at the handgun holstered at the front of the body, awkwardly positioned, sitting almost at the center of the torso rather, than at the hip where trained individuals carry firearms. They looked at the backpack, black and structured and deliberately loaded, strapped across both shoulders with the weight of whatever tools this person had decided to bring to this address in the middle of the night. They looked at the thick, dark gloves designed to cover every line of a hand, built to make a person disappear from the physical record of a crime scene. They looked at all of it. They dissected it publicly. Former FBI agents appeared on cable news within hours of the footage release to analyze everything from the suspect's body language to the brand of his footwear. Body language experts studied the way he moved, noting the absence of urgency, The comfort he displayed on an unfamiliar porch in the middle of the night, the methodical way he approached the camera and obscured it with first a glove and then a torn branch from a nearby shrub. Forensic experts commented on the clothing as potential evidence. Law enforcement analysts commented on the holster. Within 72 hours, the media had assembled what it believed was a complete picture of who this person was and what kind of world he came from. The FBI described the suspect as male, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, average build. The backpack was identified almost immediately by investigators and confirmed publicly. A black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, a working-class item in an upscale neighborhood, and the press ran hard with that detail. TMZ went further, reporting first that the jacket appeared to match a product called the Aero Hex windbreaker, and then revising their reporting to suggest an even closer match. The Athletic Works Fusion knit jacket, currently sold at Walmart, featuring a center zipper and a distinct horizontal seam across the chest, consistent with what could be seen in the footage. TMZ itself acknowledged the match was not a perfect slam dunk, noting that the style was so common across multiple brands, but the Walmart framing had taken hold. 2 Walmart products, cheap, generic, mass market. The profile that assembled itself in the public imagination was of a man with no resources, no sophistication, and no particular connection to the world Nancy Guthrie occupied. That profile was not just incomplete, it was actively misleading, and it led every single major outlet on Earth to stop looking at the jacket before they found what was hiding on it. While the world looked at what he carried, nobody looked at what he wore. And before this story takes you any further, if what you just heard made something click in your mind, if you can already feel that this is going somewhere most people have not been, take 5 seconds right now. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone you care about, someone you trust, someone who pays attention to the details that the mainstream narrative leaves behind. Because the detail we are about to show you does not just add a layer to this investigation, it reshapes the entire thing. And the more people who see it, the greater the chance that the right person, the one who has been holding a piece of this puzzle without knowing it, finally sees it too. Now, let's keep going. The doorbell footage the FBI released was not a single continuous video. It was a collection. Multiple clips, multiple still images captured across several moments as the suspect moved through the frame of that front door camera. He approached, he paused, he reached for the lens. He used vegetation torn from the garden to try to block it further. He moved with a deliberateness that law enforcement experts noted was consistent with someone who had at minimum considered the possibility that a camera was present, even if his method of concealing it was, as one former FBI agent put it, unsophisticated, because the footage was recovered from residual back-end data rather than a live, subscribed recording. A forensic achievement that required days of technical work and the direct involvement of Google's engineering team. The quality is limited, compressed, degraded by the process of reconstruction from fragments, full of the visual noise that makes precise identification at distance almost impossible without enhancement tools. But limitation has never stopped the community of researchers, former law enforcement professionals, and investigative true crime analysts who had been working this case around the clock since the night Nancy Guthrie was reported missing. They did not accept the Walmart narrative at face value. They went back to the footage, and they went through it frame by frame. What they found, buried in the grain and the night vision compression and the blur of a recording that was never supposed to be recoverable, was a jacket that does not behave like a Walmart jacket. Not in its construction, not in its design details, and not in the way its branding So Piers Bant, in multiple locations, across multiple separate frames, once you know precisely what to look for. Begin with the chest, in the clearest full body still from the footage, the image most widely circulated across the press in the days following the release. The jacket is visible from collar to waist, running horizontally across the chest, cutting all the way across the front center zipper from one side of the torso to the other is a distinct color panel, not a manufacturing seam where two pieces of fabric are joined, not a fold or a shadow created by the angle of the night vision lens. A deliberate design feature, a contrasting chest band that architecturally divides the upper body of the jacket into two separate visual zones. This is a signature design element of performance athletic wear, of institutional gear, of the kind of jacket that is built not to be bought off a shelf, but to be worn on a sideline, on a practice field, on a body that represents a program and an organization and a brand relationship with one of the largest sportswear companies in the world. Now look at the sleeves. Community researchers working independently across social media platforms, cross-referencing the doorbell stills against athletic apparel databases, product catalogs, and institutional gear archives, identified details on both arms of that jacket that were not visible in the original media coverage because no one in the original media coverage was looking for them. On the right sleeve, positioned near the cuff rather than at the shoulder or upper arm where standard retail logos typically sit, there is a raised or embossed detail, small, deliberate, consistent in its shape and placement with a logo patch sewn directly onto the cuff of a high-end performance zip-up. On the left sleeve, in a separate still captured at a different moment in the footage sequence, there is a small square emblem, defined edges, distinct corners, positioned at exactly the location where a cuff-placed branded logo would appear on a piece of custom athletic institutional gear. These details have been dismissed by some as compression artifacts, the visual noise generated when degraded footage is pushed beyond its native resolution. But the researchers who identified them were not working from a single frame. They were cross-referencing multiple frames, multiple stills, multiple angles. The details appear consistently. The placement is consistent. The dimensions are consistent. And consistency across multiple independent frames is not what artifacts look like. Artifacts are random. These are not random. And then there is the back of the jacket. In a series of enhanced stills, pushed to the absolute limits of what the recovered footage can resolve without dissolving entirely into abstraction, researchers identified something on the upper back of the jacket, positioned between the shoulder blades in the zone that performance athletic manufacturers typically reserve for a back graphic or large institutional logo. A shape with defined borders, with enough internal dimension to suggest it is not a fold or a shadow, large enough to be significant, placed with an intentionality that is consistent with the kind of back branding that appears on sideline gear, on staff-issue jackets, on the kind of apparel that is designed to be seen from behind as well as from the front, because the entire purpose of the garment is to identify its wearer with an organization. At the resolution available from the recovered footage, no one can state with absolute certainty what that shape is. This is not a claim of certainty. It is a claim of consistency. Consistency between the shape visible on the back of that jacket and a logo that millions of people in southern Arizona have been looking at their entire lives. When you take the chest band, the sleeve cuff logos, and the back graphic together, you are no longer looking at a mass-market zip-up from the sporting goods section of a big box retailer. You are looking at a jacket that carries institutional branding in at least 3 separate locations. A jacket built to identify its wearer not as an individual but as a representative of an organization. A jacket that someone did not purchase. A jacket that someone was given by someone. for a reason. And in Tucson, Arizona, in the context of this case, there's only one institution large enough, prominent enough, documented enough, and connected enough to the Guthrie family to make that organization matter. Pause for a moment and drop your location in the comments below. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? This case has been followed from every continent. People in cities and towns that Nancy Guthrie has never visited are watching these videos, reading these analyses, and feeling the weight of her absence. Drop your city, drop your country. Let's see how far this story has reached. Because the wider it reaches, the greater the pressure on everyone who still has answers and hasn't given them. The University of Arizona is not simply a university. In Tucson, it is a gravitational center around which an entire city organizes itself. It is the largest employer in the region, with a workforce that numbers in the thousands and an economic footprint that touches virtually every sector of Tucson's commercial and civic life. It shapes the city's calendar, its housing market, its restaurant culture, its traffic patterns, its politics, and its identity. On game days, entire neighborhoods transform. In the off-season, the university's athletic department, which operates a multi-million-dollar program across more than 24 varsity sports, continues to move through the city like a quiet engine, employing coaches, trainers, strength staff, medical personnel, equipment managers, facilities coordinators, administrative staff, and an extended ecosystem of contractors, vendors, and program SaaS. Affiliates whose connection to the university may not appear on a formal org chart, but is nonetheless real and ongoing. The teams are called the Wildcats. The logo is the Block A, navy blue outer frame, red interior letter, white border, clean, angular, immediately legible at distance. It is one of the defining visual symbols of the American Southwest, printed on t-shirts and hats and bumper stickers and stadium seats and the sides of buildings across a region that has watched those teams compete for generations. There is not a person in Tucson who does not recognize the Block A on sight. It is as embedded in the visual landscape of this city as the saguaro cactus and the Santa Catalina Mountains. Community researchers took that logo, the Block A in its standard configuration, and placed it directly beside the shapes visible on the upper back of the suspect's jacket in the enhanced doorbell stills. The proportions align. The dimensions, within the resolution limits of the footage, are consistent with what a Block A logo of standard sizing would look like on the back of a performance athletic jacket, viewed from a low-angle doorbell camera in degraded night vision conditions. This is community-sourced analysis. It carries no official endorsement. No law enforcement agency has confirmed it. No mainstream media outlet has reported it. But it is specific. It is documented. It is reproducible, meaning anyone who looks at the comparison images assembled by these researchers will see the same alignment. And it is visually compelling in a way that is genuinely difficult to dismiss once the comparison has been made. But the logo comparison, as striking as it is not actually the most significant part of this analysis. The most significant part is what the cuff tells us. University of Arizona does produce apparel featuring the Block A placed on the cuff. That is confirmed, but cuff placement is not standard for retail gear. The hoodies and zip-ups sold at the U of A campus bookstore, at Dick's Sporting Goods, at the official university online store, at licensed retailers across the state. Those products carry the Block A on the chest, sometimes on the sleeve near the shoulder, occasionally on the upper arm. The cuff is different territory. The cuff is where institutional gear goes, and institutional gear is a category unto itself. Research into the University of Arizona's licensing and supply relationship with Nike, the brand that holds the university's exclusive athletic apparel contract, reveals that cuff-placed Block A logos are characteristic of a very specific category of product that does not move through retail channels. Custom staff issue apparel. The jackets and zip-ups and training tops ordered directly by the University of Arizona Athletic Department through Nike's team and institutional supply division, produced in limited quantities according to departmental specifications and distributed internally to the people who run the program, the coaches on the sideline, the trainers in the treatment room, the strength and conditioning staff in the weight room, the operations personnel who keep the machine running behind the scenes. This gear does not get stocked in stores. It is not available on Amazon. It does not appear on eBay in new condition because it was never sold in the first place. The only way it enters circulation outside the athletic department's own distribution is when someone who received it gives it, sells it second-hand, or otherwise passes it along to someone outside the program. To own this jacket, you do not need a credit card and a shipping address. You need a connection, a direct institutional connection to the University of Arizona athletic program. As a staff member, a coach, a trainer, a facilities contractor, a program booster with close athletic department ties, or someone close enough to someone in that inner circle that the jacket passed from their hands into yours. The jacket is not a purchase. It is a credential. It marks its wearer as someone who belongs, or who has access to someone who belongs, to one of the most prominent athletic programs in the American Southwest. Now, place that fact against the geography of this crime. The University of Arizona's main campus sits in the heart of central Tucson. The Guthrie home is in the Catalina foothills, the elevated residential corridor that runs along the northern edge of the city, where the desert climbs toward the mountains, and the homes are larger, and the driveways are longer, and the streets are quieter, and the security systems are more sophisticated. This is not a neighborhood of convenience crimes. It is not a neighborhood where a stranger rolls through in the middle of the night and picks a target at random. It is a neighborhood where the people who live there know each other, where unusual activity at unusual hours registers, and where executing a kidnapping without triggering immediate detection requires an intimate familiarity with the terrain. The University of Arizona Athletic Department's sphere of influence does not stop at the edge of campus. It extends through the entire city. Coaches live in Tucson neighborhoods. Staff members live near their workplaces. Contractors and vendors who serve the athletic program operate across every corner of the city. The network of people who have legitimate access to U of A institutional gear, who have been issued a jacket through the athletic department's Nike supply chain, is geographically distributed across Tucson in a way that means proximity to the Catalina foothills is entirely plausible for any number of program-affiliated individuals. And then there is this. The University of Arizona is the institution from which Savannah Guthrie graduated, the daughter whose fame, whose identity as one of the most recognizable broadcasters in America, may be the very reason her mother was targeted. If this jacket connects to the University of Arizona, then the suspect on that porch was not simply a stranger to Tucson. He was a person embedded through that jacket in the same institutional world that produced the person whose mother he may have taken. If this jacket connects to the University of Arizona, this case just became something entirely different from a random home invasion. From the very earliest days of this investigation, law enforcement was consistent about one thing. This was not random. This was not an opportunistic crime. This was not a burglar who saw an open window or an unlocked door and made a split-second decision that spiraled beyond anything he intended. This was targeted. The target was chosen deliberately. The operation was planned, and the person at the center of it, the 84-year-old woman who did not show up to church on the morning of February 1st, was selected for reasons that investigators have told us they understand but have declined to Share publicly. Sheriff Chris Nanos told NBC News in March of this year, with quiet but unmistakable conviction, "We believe we know why he did this." And separately, when asked whether the crime was directed at Nancy Guthrie specifically, "We believe it was targeted." He offered no elaboration. He cited the integrity of the ongoing investigation, but those two statements together carry the full weight of what they are not saying: that the person who planned this operation knew who Nancy Guthrie was, knew what her home looked like from the outside and possibly from the inside, knew her routine well enough to time the abduction, and chose her for a reason that investigators have now identified, even if the public has not yet been told what it is. Former FBI profiler Greg McCrary reinforced this assessment without hesitation in the days following the footage release. He told CNN's reporting team that the suspect did not knock on that door randomly and stumble into an encounter with an elderly woman going about her night. What he saw in the footage, McCrary said, was the behavior of someone who was fixated, who had identified Nancy Guthrie as a specific target, who had studied her home and her movements, who arrived at that address knowing what he was walking toward. That level of target-specific knowledge does not materialize overnight. It is accumulated. It is gathered through observation, through proximity, through repeated exposure to a person's patterns and environment over a period of time long enough to build reliable intelligence. And that accumulation requires access. It requires local presence. It requires being close enough for long enough to a specific person's world that their routines become familiar. Which brings us to the question of prior visits, and to the most revealing detail the Guthrie family themselves put into the public record. When the FBI released its collection of doorbell images, observers noticed almost immediately that something was off. The images showed the suspect in different configurations. In some frames, the backpack is strapped across both shoulders. The holster is visible at the front of the body. The full operational kit is in place. In other images, the backpack is absent. The holster is gone. The same jacket, the same mask, the same build, the same individual. But the attire is different in a way that is difficult to explain if all the images were taken on the same night, within the same continuous operation. A law enforcement source subsequently told Fox News Digital that one of the images was captured on a different day entirely, that the suspect had stood on that porch before the night of the abduction in a different configuration, presumably assessing the camera, studying the entry points, learning the landscape of his target's front door. Sheriff Nanos and the Pima County Sheriff's Department both responded publicly by characterizing this claim as speculative. They noted there was no date or timestamp attached to the images as released, and that any conclusion about separate dates was not supported by verified evidence. And on that narrow technical point, they were not wrong. The timestamps, if they exist within the recovered data, have not been publicly confirmed, but then the Guthrie family released their own statement. And they did not ask the public to search their memories around February 1st alone. They asked, specifically, deliberately, with the weight of a family that has been working closely with federal investigators since day one, for people to think back to the late evening of January 11th, 20 days before the abduction, 3 full weeks before Nancy Guthrie was reported missing. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffin-Daffer analyzed the family's statement publicly and wrote in clear terms that those words pointed to the porch figure conducting a trial run on January 11th, a reconnaissance visit, a dry run, a night spent standing in the dark, outside a home in the Catalina foothills, learning everything that could not be learned from a distance. The sheriff called it speculative. The family's own statement told a different story, and what that story means in the context of a person wearing University of Arizona staff issue gear is this. You do not conduct multiple nighttime reconnaissance visits to an upscale residential neighborhood without local knowledge deep enough to make you invisible. You do not move through the Catalina foothills on foot after midnight more than once without ever triggering the kind of alarm that would have led to an immediate investigation. That kind of invisibility in that kind of neighborhood belongs to someone who knows the terrain, someone whose presence in that part of Tucson does not create friction, someone who has been moving through this city's institutional and residential landscape long enough that the city does not notice him anymore. Now look again at the holster, because the holster has been almost universally read as evidence of amateurism, and that reading deserves to be challenged directly. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe stated on CNN with complete confidence that no person with law enforcement or military training would carry a firearm the way this suspect did, positioned at almost the center of the torso, hanging off the belt in a placement that would make it nearly impossible to draw quickly and effectively in a high-pressure situation. Former FBI Supervisory Special Agent Steve Moore agreed and went further, describing the mismatch between the small semi-automatic pistol designed for with the concealment and the large frame revolver holster it was sitting in as, in his words, kind of ridiculous. Both men are correct that this does not belong to a trained shooter, but what kind of person does it belong to? Not a soldier, not a law enforcement officer, not a trained security professional, a civilian. Specifically, the kind of civilian who acquired a firearm for a single purpose, intimidation, and who compensated for the absence of firearms training with something more operationally valuable, local knowledge, institutional access, and detailed first-hand intelligence about the target and the target's environment. The kind of civilian who might spend their professional life inside a collegiate athletic program and their personal life in the neighborhoods just north of the campus that built them. The mismatched holster does not disqualify the U of A institutional profile. It fits it. And the suspect on that porch was very likely not working alone. Law enforcement sources, speaking to multiple outlets, have advanced a theory that the masked figure outside the door was not the primary actor in what happened inside the home. The theory holds that a second person was already inside the house when the doorbell camera captured the suspect on the porch, that the figure outside was the coordinator, the one managing the exterior, controlling the camera, watching the perimeter, while someone already positioned inside the home handled the abduction itself. Former Pima County homicide detective Kurt Dabb, speaking exclusively to Parade magazine, estimated between 2 and 4 people coordinated the entire operation. His assessment was unambiguous. People who intend to burglarize a home do not arrive carrying a fully loaded backpack. This was a kidnapping. And kidnappings executed with this level of coordination do not happen without planning, without communication, and without a level of mutual trust that can only be built between people who share a world. If the man on the porch was coordinating with someone already inside that home, then the question is not simply who he is. The question is who let him in, and whether the person who let him in shares the same institutional connection, the same circle, the same jacket. If you have made it this far into this story, if you have followed every web thread, absorbed every detail, stayed with us through everything we have just laid out, then stop for 1 second and drop a comment right now. Just 3 words. I am here. Let's see who is still watching. Because the people who make it to this point in a documentary like this are not casual viewers. They are the people who notice, the people who remember, the people who might be sitting right now with a detail in the back of their mind that they have not yet connected to this case. If that is you, keep watching and then call. From the moment the FBI released the doorbell footage, the investigative framework around this case was shaped by a single assumption. The clothing had a retail origin. It could be traced. It could be followed backward through purchase records and transaction histories and retailer databases until a name attached itself to a transaction and a transaction attached itself to a suspect. Former FBI intelligence analyst Jennifer Dobler laid the methodology out with precision when she told Newsweek in early March that agents were likely working with both brick and mortar and online retailers that sold the backpack and the clothing worn by the suspect, and that the process could include subpoenaing Amazon for every single purchase of the identified backpack model over the prior year, and then following up on every buyer on that list, one by one, until the trail reached the right door. Former FBI agent Jason Pack described the same process from a field perspective, investigators working backward from the images, running purchase records from every retailer in the Tucson area for every item visible in that footage. That methodology is rigorous. It has worked in other cases. When investigators can identify a product and trace its retail distribution, purchase records become one of the most powerful investigative tools available, because every retail transaction in the digital era leaves a data trail, and data trails do not lie. And data trails do not have lawyers protecting their silence. But that methodology depends entirely on one condition. The item was purchased. There must be a transaction to trace. The item must have moved through a retail channel, physical or digital, and left a record behind in some database that a subpoena can reach. What happens when the item was never sold? If the jacket on that porch is University of Arizona athletic staff issue gear, produced through Nike's institutional supply program, ordered through a documented purchase order submitted by the U of A athletic department to its Nike team representative, manufactured to departmental specification, and distributed internally through whatever process the athletic department uses to issue gear to its coaches, trainers, and staff. Then, there is no Amazon record attached to it. There is no Walmart receipt. There is no transaction history sitting in a consumer database waiting for an agent with a subpoena to retrieve it. The jacket did not change hands through a retail transaction. It changed hands through an institutional one. And the paper trail for institutional gear distribution does not live at Amazon or Walmart or Dick's Sporting Goods. It lives inside the University of Arizona. You cannot trace what was never sold, but you can trace what was issued. University of Arizona Athletic Department staff numbers in the hundreds across all programs and support functions. Nike institutional supply orders are documented. They are formal business transactions between TRUECRIME, a major university and a major sportswear corporation, and those transactions produce records, purchase orders, line item inventories, delivery confirmations, internal distribution logs that track what was made, in what quantities, at what specifications, for which program cycle. And critically, the people who received that gear are identifiable. Staff kit distribution is not anonymous. The jacket with the Block A on the cuff, in the specific configuration that community researchers have identified as institutional rather than retail, was issued to a bounded list of people, not millions of potential buyers across the country. Not an anonymous mass market pool, a list, a finite, auditable, cross-referenceable list of individuals connected to one athletic department in one city. If law enforcement has identified the jacket as University of Arizona staff issue gear, and this investigation has been in the hands of a multi-agency task force, including the FBI, which has resources and methodologies that extend far beyond what community researchers can access from doorbell stills, then the investigative landscape of this case is fundamentally different from what the public has been told. The suspect pool is not the entire population of Tucson. It is not every person who might have purchased a dark zip-up jacket in the months leading up to February 1st. It is a list of people connected to one institution, and that Institution is in this city, and its records are accessible to federal investigators with the appropriate legal instruments. DNA recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home, genetic material that does not belong to her or anyone in her immediate circle, is currently being processed at a private laboratory in Florida. The results have not been publicly confirmed. That evidence, combined with the digital analysis still underway, represents the investigative core of where this case stands today. And if the jacket provides a parallel institutional trail pointing toward the same person that DNA trail eventually names, then the architecture of this prosecution will be built on two independent pillars converging on a single answer. This may be precisely why Sheriff Nanos has spoken the way he has over the past 8 weeks. When he told NBC that investigators believe they know the motive, when he said explicitly that the crime was targeted, when he warned reporters and, by extension, the public, that the suspect could absolutely strike again. These are not the words of an investigator operating in the dark, following threads that might lead nowhere. These are the words of an investigator who understands the architecture of what happened, who knows why the target was chosen, who understands the operational logic of the crime, and who is waiting not for information he does not have, but for evidence that meets the legal threshold required to make an arrest that will survive prosecution. 58 days. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She has a pacemaker implanted in her chest to regulate a heart that was already fragile before any of this happened. She requires daily medication. Medication that was left behind at her home on the night she was taken. Medication that, without regular access, could threaten her life. Her daughter stood in front of a camera and said the words that no child should ever have to say out loud. Someone knows something, and maybe somebody's afraid. And I understand that, but our hearts are in agony. We can't breathe, we can't live. Those words belong to a woman whose mother is still somewhere out there, still missing, still waiting in whatever circumstances she is being held. For one person to make one phone call, for one witness to connect one detail to one name, for one person who has been sitting with a piece of this story in the back of their mind, something small, something that seemed insignificant at the time, something they dismissed because they could not imagine it was connected to anything as enormous as this, to finally pick up the phone. The masked man on that porch covered his face with a ski mask. He covered the camera with a glove and then with a shrub. He covered his path out of the neighborhood with a level of operational awareness that, 58 days later, has still not been fully unraveled by the combined resources of the FBI, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the Guthrie family's own private investigators, and the collective intelligence of millions of people who have been watching this case since the first morning it broke. But he did not cover the jacket. He walked up to that camera, on that porch in that neighborhood, wearing gear that community researchers believe traces back to one of the most documented and institutionally transparent organizations in the state of Arizona. He stood in the field of that doorbell lens and did not anticipate that the footage itself, footage he may have believed was gone forever once he disconnected the camera, would be reconstructed from server residuals by the engineering team of one of the largest technology companies on Earth. He did not anticipate that the blurry fragments of that recovered recording would be examined by researchers who refused to accept the mass-market narrative, who looked past the backpack, who looked past the holster, who looked at the jacket, who noticed the chest band, the cuff emblems, the shape between the shoulder blades, who placed those shapes beside a logo that every person in this city has known since childhood, and asked the question that no one in the mainstream press has yet had the courage, or the resources to ask. The Block A navy blue outer frame, red interior letter, white border, the mark of the University of Arizona Wildcats, one of the most identifiable logos in the American Southwest. If researchers are right, If the jacket on that porch carries that logo, then the suspect did not just leave a trail at the scene. He left an institutional fingerprint. He left, embedded in the fabric of what he wore, a connection to a world with records and rosters and documentation and names. A world that federal investigators with the right tools and the right legal instruments can enter. A world where the question is no longer who in this entire city could have done this, but who on a specific list connected to a specific program in a specific institution stopped showing up after February 1st and hoped that nobody would notice. Someone noticed. This channel exists because of people exactly like you. People who care enough to stay with a story past the point where the mainstream coverage stopped. People who understand that the details matter, that the framing matters, that the questions nobody is asking are often the questions that lead somewhere real. If this documentary is the kind of work you want to see more of, if you want this channel to keep producing investigations at this level, then consider joining our YouTube membership today. Your membership directly funds the research, the production, and the team that makes documentaries like this one possible. Members receive access to exclusive content, early video releases, and the knowledge that they are directly contributing to keeping stories like Nancy Guthrie's alive in the public consciousness long after the mainstream cameras have moved on. The link is below this video, and if membership is not the right fit for you right now, a like, a subscription, and a share cost nothing and carry more weight than you know. Do all three for Nancy. The FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. The Guthrie family reward stands at $1 million for information leading to Nancy's safe recovery. The investigation is active. The family is still asking. And Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, pacemaker, daily medication, more than 50 years in a city that should have been safe, is still missing. If you have seen this jacket, not in a store, not on a screen, but on someone you know, someone connected to University of Arizona athletics, someone whose routine or behavior changed in the days and weeks after February 1st, someone who went quiet or disappeared or offered an explanation that never quite sat right. The FBI is not asking you to be certain. They are not asking you to have all the answers. They are asking you to call one tip, one name, one detail that seems too small to matter until it connects to something else, and suddenly everything shifts. Somewhere between the people watching this video right now and the people who have not yet seen it is the person who recognizes that jacket, who sees the chest band and the cuff emblem and knows immediately, not from a side-by-side comparison, but from memory. From proximity, from having seen that jacket on a specific person in a specific place, exactly what it is and exactly who wears it. When that person sees this video, they need to know what to do. So share it. Put it in front of as many eyes as you possibly can, because the right person has not seen it yet. And when they do, they can bring her home.